Okay. So hello everyone. Officially welcome to Women Who Code's interview ready series. And today's topic being UI UX, user interface and user experience. Today, we are joined here with Women Who Code. Women Who Code is an international not-for-profit organization, and we are focusing on having women excel in careers in technology careers and technology paths. We provide services as well as a job board for people seeking professions in coding and design tech in all the different positions in technology. Our mission is to inspire women to excel in their careers in technology. And our vision also is we foresee a world where women are representative of the positions, higher up positions of technical executives, of founders, of VCs, of board members, and of software engineers. That is what we want to see in the world. That's our vision. Before we move forward with the event, I would like to inform you of the code of conduct. It's an Women Who Code is an inclusive community, and we're dedicated to providing an empowering experience for everyone who participates in the community, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, ability, physical appearance, race, ethnicity, age, religion, socioeconomic status, caste, creed, political affiliation, or preferred programming languages. Our events here are intended to inspire women to excel in technology, and anyone who is here for any purpose is welcome. We do not tolerate harassment of our members in any form, and you can assess more of our code of conduct on the website. If you will go to the next slide, you'll see that Women Who Code is now able to provide services in 134 countries. And before it was digital, it was this pool of countries was much smaller. But given the technological advances, we are able to expand and have a little community in different parts of the world, 134 parts of the world. So we hope that regardless of where you are from, you're able to find some community. The next slide will show you that, like I mentioned, regardless of where you're from, you're able to join events that are held anywhere because a lot of them are held online. So you have access to all of these events. We have study sessions, we have workshops, we have interview sessions like these where you can actually learn from professionals in their career who are learning as well. And it's just supposed to be an interactive learning community where everyone, regardless of their experience or their wisdom, is able to share and grow together. So we can get started with our session today. Very briefly, I would like to introduce our two hosts for today, Aditi Kumbhat and Esther Jingxin. Aditi is an experienced and product designer with a background in branding and packaging design. She believes in creating purposeful and immersive solutions that solve problems. Esther is a designer and strategist with background in social impact design, systems thinking, and analytics. She currently works as a product designer in Shopify. So this is an interview-ready series which will help you assess what are the facets that a person going in for an interview for today's topic, UI UX, can expect. What are some tips that they can use and know to be able to do well in these interviews and hopefully going forward in your career as well. So without any further delay, I would like to pass it on to our hosts. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. So nice to see everyone here today. And yeah, Aditi and I are thrilled to be kind of having this session. It's a cozy session today, which means that we'll be able to have it a bit more interactive. And so just feel free to give any comments on the chat or even kind of speak out on the camera if you want to as well. Yeah, so today we'll be kind of talking about our personal experiences with navigating UX interviews. When Aditi and I came together, we had some amazing engaging conversations just about our own approaches and experiences when it comes to interviewing. And we also realized that we've been recently interviewing as well, up to 6 months back for me. And Aditi really recent, so she'll talk more about that. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the introductions as well. Thank you, Brenda, and thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, we're just here to tell you that we're humans like you. Esther and I go back a little while, but we definitely have our own fair share of successes and failures. And we hope that our experiences will either help you figure out that you resonate with them, or at least there's something different that you could try that's going to help you along the way. So yeah, we look forward to sharing more with you. So a little bit about us. Should I jump to?
Go ahead.
Sorry. So as we introduce ourselves, I'm Aditi. I am actually in between roles. I started my new role at Huge next week. I started out by stealing code and putting together websites back in the day when I didn't want to do my homework. But it turns out I ended up wanting to do packaging and branding. So I got a degree in graphic design. And somewhere along the way, I decided to move into UX because I like solving problems. And it was a different kind of experience, building different experiences and packaging ideas differently. So I recently was in a consultancy, and now I'm moving back to agency. For me personally, I focus on experience design, and I'm hoping to move more so into product design. And the last interview that I did was last week.
Yeah, so for myself, I am currently working. I started my career in UX, just like straight out of university and after getting a degree from engineering. And where I began was in consulting. So that's where you just like do a lot of projects that are usually less than a few months. And then after that, I went to government as an internal consultant. And somewhere in the middle, I took a master's in social design and explored more social sector opportunities. But right now I'm back into product and tech, so working on e-commerce. So Shopify is an e-commerce platform tool. And I enjoy it because it's kind of mission oriented in trying to support and help make small business owners kind of succeed. Yeah, so for myself, I focus more on interaction design with some level of product management and understanding how product strategy works in the company. And yeah, I actually also recently moved into my role 6 months back after I graduated. Yeah, and I think what's important and my goal, I guess, for this session and why I agreed to take part was just to be able to showcase the ability to find a company that cares about you authentically as a person, and also help it, like being prepared and giving the company an insight to who you are beyond just a candidate, but as a designer, as an identity of yourself as a person as well, your own values and your own philosophies. Yeah, so I'm just going to try to make this session interactive. So just to know a little bit of who you are, I'm not sure, we have a couple of folks in the audience right now, but I'm just curious as to like which level of experience or seniority in your career, this will be helpful for us to understand how better to cater our conversation moving forward, just to know like where everyone is right now. Yeah, so if you are able to, you can put responses in the notes or you can just type it out on the chat as well. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Karina. So Karina says that she's been working in the tech area for 10 years as a front-end developer and UI designer, and doing volunteering for pro bono, and right now relocating as a UX designer. Thanks.
Lots of students. Brenda and Candice, what are you studying?
I'm currently studying biomedical science.
Oh, that's cool.
Very cool.
Oh, we have career switchers as well. Yay.
Yeah, well, I think it's nice to know. So we're kind of like all really excited about the UX industry, trying to get into it. So I think that's helpful for us to know as well as we're kind of going into the check today. So next question. So what do you want to find out from today's session? I think again, you could type here or you could also type it in the chat. So just wanted to just know what are some of the goals of today's session, and like what are some of the priorities that you really want to find out today, so we can keep our session better. So you can keep the questions or like comments coming in if you want.
That's so interesting. UX designer and interested in front end.
UX. Okay, cool. We can do a bit about it.
Is there anything specific about this? Like, is it the process? Is it the kind of work? If you guys can, if you want to add some of the comments in the chat, just be a little more granular, and then we'll try to touch on those points as we talk through a lot of the things as well.
Cool. UX challenge is something we would be.
Oh, we're getting there. We have a big one about that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it seems like thanks for your active participation. I think most of us probably would. Most people would probably have responded by now. So I mean, you can keep them coming. We have access to kind of seeing the responses even after the slide. So thank you. So we'll just go ahead with the call and look, with the chat, and make sure that we address some of your considerations.
So I do love my GIFs, and I'm guessing this shows my age as well. But if I reflect a little bit about my personal experience with interviews, it's difficult. It's hard. Well, for me personally, it's very anxiety inducing, because like when it started, it's just 1 or 2 rounds, your portfolio matters, and then the criteria keeps changing. You spend a lot of time and energy trying to be your happiest self. You want to make an impression, but then you're also like, struggling with, oh my God, I must not forget to tell them this, or share this about my work, or, win some brownie points in different places. So yes, it sounds generic, but the best way to do it is being prepared. At least that's what I felt. Esther, ready for you to chime in. But there's different ways and different tactics that work for every single person. So we're definitely going to be sharing some of the ones that work for us. And hopefully it does help you. And everyone's level of preparedness is always different, but it may actually help you stay calm and proceed, and, hopefully get the job of your dreams.
Yeah, I think I resonate definitely. I'm also a bit of a student, so we'll share a little bit later, but I have like a whole list of interview questions and like all the study notes behind like how we should answer it and all that. Like definitely being prepared is like the first step to being successful in the UX interview journey. So we wanted to kind of also just briefly share a bit about what our own past experiences with UX interviews and what we've observed about the industry as a whole, at least in Singapore, and maybe extending a bit to Southeast Asia as well. So myself, I've gone through a fair share of interviews with 3 job searches since like the start of my career, varying from consulting, startups, and product as well. And I also helped to hire for my team when I was in GovTech Singapore. So that was the government agency that I was talking about. And I also mentioned, recently interviewed. So I think the UX process, interview process has changed a lot. Like since 7 years ago when I first started out interviewing, I remember that first role I got, I just got in through one portfolio review and interview just from one session. So that's so crazy, because now usually there's like, I think my current role, I went through at least 5 interviews. So that's like super insane, just with the rigor that the companies are looking out for, and also I think with the much larger candidate pool. So I think what really stood out though, like throughout all these years, is always the portfolio, because we're interviewing for a designer role, right? So that's like a really key part of defining myself as the designer, just like understanding how to curate the portfolio and how to showcase like your best skills and yourself as a designer. So Aditi, what do you think?
I think I agree with you. Our portfolio plays a really big part. I come from a history of agencies, consulting, smaller service consultancies, or just like smaller teams, because I freelanced a lot as well. But what I've realized is a lot of strategy and soft skills comes into how we present our work, how we're putting ourselves out there, and how we're representing the concept or whatever we're trying to communicate or work on. So not just the portfolio, but for me personally, because I think it's agency and consulting where you do more presentations, and presenting and selling of ideas, that your personality needs to come through. I think the strongest thing is, do you have the aptitude to actually do the work? Like, it's something that can be nurtured on the job. I think progressively, having worked in Singapore first, they used to just care about the number of years that you would work and what your portfolio looks like. But I think now employers are leaning towards, can you do this? Do you have the initiative to do this? Is this a talent that we can nurture? How is this person going to sit on the team? So those are some of the things that I feel work to my advantage, but also is what I've experienced. Maybe that's why I'm used to it. That being said, I've also been on the hiring end for when I have to hire for my team and recruitment. So some of my feedback comes from that. Most of them are usually 3 to 6 rounds. And I think the more senior you get, the harder it gets. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Let's move to the next question. So after interviewing for such a long time, right, what are some of the key differences in what we observe in how companies interview? So I think I mentioned earlier just now that the hiring process is very varied, and even up to today, there are still companies, like especially smaller startups, that have lesser capacity to have such a detailed interview process, right? So then usually it's 1 or 2 rounds, and for startups especially, they're likely to assess someone as a generalist. So understanding UI UX and in itself as a role is something to think about, right? There are companies who are very established who only look out for someone who does UI, which is usually visual designers, and then UX is like interaction design or user researchers. So this could be very, very distinct roles in larger companies, but possibly in a startup, it's usually someone who can do every single thing. So that would be also how, as a candidate, you want to frame the way that you kind of present yourself to be a suitable person for the company. And when in a smaller firm, you'll most likely meet someone who's like on the exec level, so you kind of get access to that top level. And that also reflects on how potentially when you join the company, how the relationship will look like as well with more senior leadership and things like that. So that's something to think about. And then I mentioned earlier, for larger tech companies, it can be very structured. There's usually a recruiter that actually supports you throughout the process, and they are in it to help you succeed as well. So that's something that's helpful, versus possibly in other usual companies, there's usually the hiring manager, who's that person in the team who's looking out for someone to join their team. And that person usually would be like, who is someone who is a designer or has identified as like a UX manager of sorts. So it's very important to just like whoever's interviewing at different stages of the process to see whether they know design in the first place, right? So then it kind of like crafts the way that you respond. And then this thing I wanted to bring up as well, that some companies are a bit more mission focused. So then as something that are looking out for people, for candidates, they want to see if they are also as mission focused as them. When I was in GovTech, so we care about like building up citizens' lives. So we are also looking for candidates who are able to show that they care about improving the lives of the public and like improving public services. I think now Aditi can share a little bit about like what companies are looking out for differently. So
I think I think not just what they're looking out for, but it's also just, Esther, of our conversation, like the sheer types of interviews that we face, right? So this is going to be a little bit from the hiring side and a little bit from being a candidate as well. So the 3 things, at least I've noticed, is they come in different lenses. What is the criteria that you're being evaluated at, right? So are they looking for a specific skill? Are they looking to see that, hey, we only have UI designers, we need the UX designer, or we need someone who can do a specific kind of job, and that's why we're interviewing for these kind of candidates? Are we looking for roles? Do we have a surplus of interaction designers and then we need more UX designers? Or do we need something very specific, like are you a front end and a UI dev hybrid? Like, teams have different requirements. There's also the unbiased interviewing, where you're not necessarily meeting the team that's going to be hiring you, which is very odd, but it's also very interesting. I happen to have experienced this recently, where they get people who do what you do. So I met a lot of different product designers around the world. They interviewed me, but because they have nothing to do with the team that I'm joining, there is an unbiased interview, versus where skill and role are, you're usually meeting C-suite people, or you're meeting your immediate team, or likely your manager. it really depends on the environment and what they're looking for. But these are 3 different lenses through which they tend to work or look at interviews. Yeah. So if I go to the next one, most of the time we are applying to a lot of jobs and we're just trying to fit in, and it's hard. It's like, do I 100% believe that I'm meant to be here? Am I going to give them something that matters, or vice versa? Are they going to help me grow? And then it's about that relationship. Like, are we meant to be? Are we? Or are you? Like, most of the time I feel like I'm a brick just trying to fit into the pavement. But there's different points at which I think we can demonstrate differentiators. So if you're there before the interviews, how do I assess whether the role was a fit for me? So if I'm going through the job description, sometimes companies generic ones. Otherwise, they have a very specific one, like for a specific project or a specific product if you're going in-house. So I would look at what they're looking for and try and see, it's almost like a self-assessment. Does this work? Do I know how to do this? And do I need to talk about what I'm willing to learn? So that's how I would assess the fit. Back to Esther's point, it's about cross-referencing your own values and what you believe in. And do you think you're going to be happy? Those values end up deciding whether, am I the right fit? And then how can I demonstrate it to the interviewer? By calling out those things. Like, what are the things? What is the work that I've done? What have there been, like, what other experiences do I have, knowledge from other industries that can help contribute and complement the role that I am applying for? So those are some of the ways that I would do it. That was mostly, like, sometimes it's even worth finding out information about the people you're interviewing if they're not anonymous, and then trying to strike a conversation and then seeing what information they can give you during the interview so that you can better shape your answers. Is there anything to add?
Yeah, I think for myself, there's fit in different dimensions, right? Like, so what I was looking out for in, like, just really for myself, I did a personal self-reflection, like what is in it right now in my current role that I want to kind of like build on and find out, I find like better options, so like feel fulfilled in my next role, for example. So I was really looking for growth and mentorship when in my newer role. So then that's where I would look into the team setup in the potential places that I'll be interviewing at, right? So how the rituals are set up, are there kind of sessions whereby designers come together and support each other? How do they promote exchange of ideas and feedback and things like that? Is there a community that's like public online that really tries to support the wider UX community? That was something important to me as well. Yeah, so I think like look into different fits in different areas. So like the fit within you and the team, in the design team, wider in like the product team with engineers as well, and also in potentially like the way the company approaches the work. So whether like their mission aligns with you, whether you can get behind some of the leadership kind of decisions that are making in the wider sense of things. Yeah, so I think those things are really important. So it's not just about the company wanting you, right? You also make sure that when you join a company, then it's going to be like a good fit and an enjoyable experience for you as well. Yeah. So I'm going to move ahead to kind of talk about the UX interview process. So it's going to be looking very different, I mentioned earlier, right, with every single company, but I think it can be roughly broken down into this couple of steps. So some steps might be missing and some companies might be there. So these are some things that could happen. So usually there would be a phone screening or someone who contacts you and tries to understand who you are and what you're looking out for and arranges the interviews. There would be definitely a UX interview, and that could be coupled with the portfolio presentation or not. It depends on the number of people interviewing you as well. So usually the interviews will be assessing you on like behavioral questions, whether you would be assessed to be working well with the team or not. Some craft-based questions around like maybe how would you approach a certain design challenge. Yeah, so that's like very interview-based, conversational-based. There could also be there would definitely also be a portfolio presentation. So this would be where you showcase some of the case studies. So that would be usually a key place whereby the interviewer would assess you on your design craft. And then certain other optional things that the company might do is to give certain design challenges, such as product picks, a whiteboarding exercise that we'll go through a little bit more later, as well as certain take-home challenges. And then lastly, there could be also other things around like meeting other people and members of the team, people who might be working with you very directly, so their opinions maybe matter a bit more strongly. And then also like even a wider team. So like I remember in my last role, I was like having coffee with like 10, maybe like 5 to 8 other people, just like understanding what it would feel like to be part of the team and vice versa, I imagine as well. Yeah. So Aditi, anything else that you wanted to add on to this process?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it. It sounds exactly like what we would call a chemistry session at PwC where I was working before. So yeah, it's not just the team that you're going to join where you're delivering the work, but it's also about everyone else that you're going to work with in the ecosystem. So yeah, besides that, yeah, I think those are the only steps that they might have.
Yeah. So we'll be going to some of these like key parts and share with you our own personal approaches to them. So first is the portfolio presentation. So I already mentioned this is always going to be there for every single interview session. So it's really important to kind of do it well. So yeah, what's our personal approach? So for myself, being a presentation, it's very important to use a slide deck, which I always do. It shows polish, and then it's a different experience. So like some people usually, there are candidates who show like a website and just scroll through as they talk through. So that kind of has a very different experience from having a curated deck, right? So you would be able to show those visual prompts and as you are speaking through them. And then for myself in my deck as well, not just like for case studies, I will also add in things about myself as well as my approach to design, different things like case studies as well as testimonials, and a summary of why I'm a good fit for a company. So I always end with that, so that is like the last thing they take away from. So it's also important to show that you are customizing the deck to the companies to kind of match what their expectations is like. So that's where also if you are able to look at the job description again and see where you can bring in examples or kind of bring in certain kind of terms that they are really looking out for, that you are skills that you want to demonstrate, that would be really helpful. Yeah. How about you, Aditi?
I think I'm on the other end of things where I have my website and I have to go through it because my case studies tend to be super, super long. I think it's all about keeping them simple and having more visual attributes. There's always that fine line. And you know, Esther, I would love your input on this is your website always has to have enough detail that they can skim through. But then when you're doing the presentation for them, it needs to be, I would think it needs to be a little more visual, just because, so you're talking and you're distracting them less. So there's always that pendulum that goes back and forth on what your portfolio should look like, but consider how simply you can put something while anchoring the person to the content that you're actually trying to call out. I think one important thing is like when you're doing the presentation itself, if you think that you're going to go through multiple pieces, time it, or at least keep the structure in a way where it's easy to go through. Otherwise, it'll just feel like a run-on case study, and I've been guilty of it. The interviewer was just like, wait, what's that one project? And I was like, oh my God, that's really bad. So yeah.
Yeah, so I guess like on speaking of case studies and how we present them, right? I have some like thoughts around what would make a good case study, just because of all the, I guess, portfolios I've reviewed before and presentations I've done personally as well. It's always important. Every single project has to start with the context, right? Like, what was the company? Like, was it a personal project? Or who was the team? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? That's like the main thing. And then like also see how you can approach things differently, like make a positive, like different spin of how you would story tell the project. So think of it more as like maybe a magazine article rather than like a school project that you want to like just show a report on, right? So for myself, I usually for each case study go through like a rough overview of the project, just like the key phases of the design. So like there's something that can keep people grounded. And then after that, I focus straight into like top challenges that I face. So I'll have like 3 to 4 challenges. And then for each challenge, I'll talk about, okay, this was the thing that I'm trying to tackle. And then I use this approach called like CAR, so challenge and then action. So like what's the thing I did to approach the challenge? And then like what are the things that I did to solve and kind of like learn more about the challenge, tackle it, and then what's the result. So at the end, what was the outcome that came out of it that supported my design rationale or like brought the design forward. Yeah, and then to that extent, right, like in each of these challenges, always show a very clear connection between the design activity that you did as well as then the solution that came out of it. Yeah, so like for example, if there was like some sort of a user research that was being done, if you talk to people and interviewed them, summarize them to key insights, and then also specifically call out with these insights, how did that translate into the design solution? For myself, I like to go through with this through certain call outs on design principles. So like because of some of the things I interviewed with someone, I realized that simplicity is very important, more so than it being very comprehensive. So that is something that can showcase that you are able to think critically and have an opinion about the design. And that's really important for kind of interviewers to assess that you are someone who can I really understand the design process and deliver results. And yeah, I think the last piece that I really think is important when it comes to storytelling is making it personal, right? Like how is your reflection after finishing the project? What are some things that you have done differently, or with the constraints that were existing, if they were not there anymore, how would you do them differently? I think those really help you kind of frame yourself as someone who is able to think beyond just like doing the work, like really always reflecting and always thinking about how to better make it. Yeah, so that's how I approach. Is there anything else you want to add, Aditi?
To Esther's point about, how you approach everything, right? It's not just about your process and it's not just about your actual design. Yes, they're looking at your hard skills, but what was the outcome of your work? I think I read this, some senior designer manager somewhere in Singapore put this on LinkedIn, and it stung so hard, and it's probably the best advice that I've gotten for your resume and for your portfolio. Call out your outcomes, but also how did you measure success, or what was the impact of your work? So for example, a piece that I've done, I used to have a hospitality client that I worked on for 3 years. Did like one of the key metrics was, yeah, sure, I helped them design their loyalty program and do this and gamify it, but they're like, yeah, but what did it result in? And an example would be that we increased their base from like 1,000 to 2,000 of their gold members or something like that. I forget what the exact metric is, but it shows that you delivered something of value to the business. It's not just about your own work and your craft. It's also about why we should hire you so that we can succeed with our clients, or at least if you're in-house, push our product further. So impact, the differences, any outcomes, and what was like, even highlighting what you may have maybe done differently based on any assumptions you had to make or any constraints. Even if you don't want to put that visually, but when walking through your portfolio presentation, those are really, really good to call out. The reason I would recommend putting them in your portfolio is sometimes when evaluating candidates, and when I was on the hiring side of things, you end up wanting to see if this person even has it, and this is what you're looking for because of a client or something that you're hiring them for. And if it's not there, the person may have had a chance to speak to it, but then you didn't actually give that candidate a chance. So that's why I would say that's really, really crucial, especially because as product design and UI and UX design moves forward, everything is measured. So that's a really key thing to put in.
Yeah, I think usually as designers, a lot of the times we tend to glaze over like a lot of the business metric type stuff and just focus on doing the work and like showcasing the best experience, right? But like having that would set you apart, for example, and also show that diligence, because a lot of the times you just do the design and then we just like forget about it and then move on to the next thing. But it is something of a call out. So even in your day-to-day, if you are working on certain things, always like keep that metric at the back of the mind and see if there are any ways to collect some information. So even if it's like a school project or even if it's like a personal pet project, there are ways that you could also quantify some of the stuff. So like maybe certain testing that you've done, how has the testing improved throughout the different iterations that you've done? So things like that can just kind of like show that you also think about numbers, right, rather than just like screens and aesthetics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share about portfolios? So now we can move to some other parts.
I think every single thing that you share ends up prompting another thing. I think I like to end on the fact that it's not about here's a checklist of what I managed to do and here's what I can do as a UX or UI task, and this is what I'm good at. This is what my work resulted in. That's really important to call out. And also why you chose that methodology or that activity or that task to get to the answer or the outcome that you needed or had to get to. That's super important. So if you can highlight that, it shows that you're making rational decisions and not just going through the double diamond process because you have to. That is crucial. Yeah.
Good point. Well, okay, then I think I just wanted to showcase a little bit of something special that you can consider making and kind of like think about. I mean, you don't have to make the same thing, but like think about something that for yourself that would make you stand out. Yeah, so something that can showcase your individuality and make it memorable for the interviewer. At the end of the day, if they interview like 5 people, what will make them remember you, right? So for myself, I did this sketch note that showcases kind of my background and who I am as a designer, as well as I guess at the same time, like demonstrate a bit of a visual skills, right? And I also like to include a section on design philosophy. So if you see, I mean, things that are important to me as a designer to build trust in the team, to approach with care, and to develop a more strategic understanding of things around us. So it shows that I have a point of view, and this is gonna be what they will be expecting of me when I go into the role. Yeah. So yeah, just look into the company you're interviewing at. It will be even better if you can relate some of the things that are about you and what we talked about fit earlier, right? And link it back to what the company is also looking for. Yeah. So we'll now move on to some of the UX exercises and challenges that I think someone mentioned earlier.
I will take this one because I've done too many of these to count. In fact, I think there are more design tests in my arsenal than portfolio pieces, which is really sad. But the dreaded take-home challenge, if you haven't done this before, good for you. If you have, I feel you. These end up being tasks and briefs that are vague. You usually get 2 to maybe 5 days to do them on average. This is what most companies will do. The challenges end up being something like redesign something or craft a whole other experience or rethink the strategy. Or they even change where it's not even design test, it's just a task. And my experience here was because the company I was applying for was doing a very research heavy project, and that's what I was being hired for a long-term gig. They wanted to assess that, so it ended up being a whole research case study, which already threw me for a curveball because I've only done design once before that. So as an applicant, I think the biggest thing was over time, you start seeing that you have a short amount of time. Work your way backwards. You have 3 days or 4 days to do this. What are the tasks you need to do? Here's where the checklist actually comes in handy. Start timing them. Draft an outline of what your potential presentation needs to look like. Stylize it later, but stitch that story. That story is going to tie together how and why you chose to approach and solve the problem that very specific way. Do research. Talk to your friends, find fake people, make stuff up, but show that you're trying to do and get some genuine information. And if you actually had assumptions, synthesize it, capture it, synthesize it, but make sure you call it out because they actually want to know how you work with information at hand and what you do when you don't have information at all. So if you're reading the brief, it's not just identifying the problem. So it's saying, oh, the user needs this. It's not always about the user. Yes, the user is a huge part of it, but you also need to think of what it's bringing to the business. So have a statement somewhere about what is the business problem? What is the user problem? Reframe it, and then give the person who's going to be looking or going through your test a chance to understand that this is the lens through which you interpreted the brief that I gave you, and this is what you're solving for. Once you know how you're solving for it, what methodologies do you need to use to get to that answer? Like I mentioned earlier, the double diamond is not a hard structured rule, but you pick and choose what you actually need to get to the answer. What information do you have? How am I going to get the information that I need to solve this problem? Make those choices and demonstrate how you went about using them and why you made that choice. Use visual elements. Yes, they always want a prototype. If not, just ask them. They'll actually tell you we need a clickable prototype, especially if it's a UI test. If it's more about logic, a couple of screens and some finesse to your skills will do. If it's UX or it's interaction, animate something and hand them over. But always go back to your interviewer or the recruiter and actually ask, what are they really looking for if it's not clear enough? Decide on what needs to be there, because you have a very short time to communicate how you're actually solving for it. At the end of it, the one thing that I've realized that always works is, what were your reflections and learnings? And considering you had 3 days to solve a problem, it's like writing a case study, but actually doing it as you're writing it. So could there be something that I did differently in a very, very short amount of time? And right before your interview, you're like, oh, I have 15 minutes, and you have all these little brain farts. So you're like, okay, I could have tried this differently, and this is how I might go about it next time, and this is why I would do it. They would actually appreciate that, because you're reflecting on your work. So while these are tips on how to go about structuring your tasks, one of the things that I would say is keep your frameworks and a template of your documents ready to go. So it sounds crazy. The more design tests you do, you realize what your style of presenting is, what works for you. Keep a draft of it somewhere so that you can start keying in information, and stylizing it later comes a lot easier. It gives you more time to actually focus on your tasks. So yeah,
Nice.
And hopefully it takes the stress off you.
I thought it was interesting, like the part about asking questions, right? Because I've been on the assessor side of things, and there are certain take-home challenges that are like phrased to be particularly vague, or like it's going to be too much work for the candidate to finish. So we really appreciate it when candidates come back to us and ask us questions, or like scope it in a way that is manageable for them. Yeah, like ask all the clarifying questions, validate some of the assumptions that they're making. Yeah, so that's like an additional thing to note. So right, like this kind of like a hidden rule, because nobody will talk about it, and that's what people are not going to be expecting to do, but it really makes you stand out as well. It makes you feel like, make the person feel like you're thinking about the project in a more critical lens.
I'm really glad you do that. Having been on the assessor side, it's just like, so do you just like, it makes me wonder if this candidate, if they end up joining my team, are you just going to take everything at face value, or are you going to question it? Like if I tell you to get off the bridge, will you actually do it? Will you actually stand by your team and say, this is sufficient work and this is doable in a certain amount of time, or this is what we can accomplish in a specific amount of time? It shows that overall thinking as well, I would like to think. And I think it's contributed to me being a UX manager before. So I think it gave me that practice, but I definitely know that my assessors told me that later. They were like, yeah, considering you asked, that validation helps, that, okay, I just didn't try to tackle a behemoth and end up doing a shoddy job. You focusing on a task alone that you have narrowed down, which is where the reframing comes in, is super, super helpful to showing how you juggle and break things down.
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, the approach to the design challenge is also pretty similar to a whiteboarding exercise. So I'll just go through that in a bit. So it is kind of like a bite-sized version of showcasing your design process. So for whiteboarding, it's usually a 45 to 60-minute kind of exercise. It's also usually one-on-one with another designer, someone who's probably on the team, or it could be also a separate assessor, but usually on the same level or some slightly higher. Why companies do it is also to see how it's like to work with you and collaborate with you, understand a bit more of like how your brain works, how your design process is like, how you think through a problem. And some examples is, I won't go through the ones that I've actually experienced, but the ones online that people talk about is how you design an ATM machine, even like maybe a kiosk at like a train station, right? How would you do the top up for a transit card? Let's say if you have a screen and 4 buttons. Yeah. So there's something to think about. Some really unique kind of challenges, usually not actual things that the company is doing, just because you don't want to, they don't want to capitalize and like capitalize on the candidate's process. So how would I approach a whiteboarding exercise? Usually I'll have a game plan. So this is all about preparation, right? There's a lot of resources online on how you would approach the problem. And this is where also there's difference between remote interviewing as well as being there in person. If you are like, so I've done a lot of interviewing in the past year, right? So that's when it's remote and you have a lot of things that you can have access to while you're on the computer. So like templates and things like that. So for my interviewing for whiteboarding, they sent me like a collaborative whiteboard, right? So something on Miro or Figma. And then because of that, you're able to already start preparing your structure, a bit of your elements, maybe like a virtual post-it board that you can start adding things immediately. So these are things that is really helpful to start preparing for. And then also have a structure in place. There are really resources online, but always start with the problem and the needs, and then go into user flows if needed, and then go into some of the ideas. Do not ever go straight into the solution. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. Yeah, and then also always start with asking the questions first. So it's the same thing as earlier, right? Clarify who is the target, clarify certain things around what does success look like, what are you trying to optimize for, and yourself, like also set the context for yourself. Who are you and what is your team like? What's the timeline you're working with? So those things will help the interviewer know that you know what your work looks like as a designer, and you're able to frame your work properly. And especially in today's context, there's a lot of projects that are very ambiguous. So if you're able to do this scoping, right, it really sets you apart. Yeah, and then just the other part about just always involving the other person at every step of the process. Pretend that they are someone who's a collaborator rather than someone who's evaluating you. You can always ask for their opinions and feedback, and it's always a plus point because then they see that you know how to engage someone else in your design and kind of have that like bouncing back and forth. Yeah, so they are looking for the way you think, and just don't need to think about too much about having the perfect solution. Make sure you pace yourself. So one thing that I didn't do so well is like I kind of like went very detailed into the front and then left very little time at the end. So don't do that, and just like have that pace so that even though the solution is not important, but it's important to showcase the entire process of how you would go through it, right? So then that's really helpful to have them know and assess you on that. Yeah, so I think that main thing I wanted to say is like that diversion and conversion process. How do you kind of like come up with many ideas, frame the problem first, come up with the ideas, and then like decide on what's the best solution given that short amount of time. Yeah, so that's some of the tips that I have for whiteboarding exercise. So I have some resources that I found helpful. You feel free to kind of like take a note of this. This book itself, Solving Product Design Exercises, there's a whole series of examples that you can actually look into. And what I did was just see the prompt, try it out for myself, write down some prompters, and then practice, right? So if you're able to practice it, it's going to build a muscle. And whiteboarding is very different from actually doing a project. So that's something that you might need some practice and then yeah, like get some advice and resources on. Okay, so I think this one someone asked, so this is important to handle.
So I think we've had a chance to talk to you about how we've been evaluated and how we actually evaluate our candidates as well. So most of them are around design craft, your working style and self-mastery, and finding the right culture fit. In the interest of time, I'll spend less time going through this. Take a screenshot if you want, but a lot of these things are things that you need to know or you already know. It's just about finding ways to highlight them or bring them across in the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile just talking about the main things, right? So like assessing you as a design craft, like so many companies have a rubric. So they would have like a section on design craft. Is this person going to be able to do the job? Whether you work well with others, and personally, are you a person who is motivated to learn? Do you thrive in ambiguity? Do you have leadership? Do you take proactiveness? And the last one is whether you fit the culture. And there's a lot of books, resources online that says not just a culture fit, but and culture add as well. How do you prove that you are also a valuable asset and you're able to contribute in a way that's not just being like just another person and like doing the work and being a cog in the machine, but then really seeing how you can improve the company even. Yeah. So I think we can end off before we go to Q&A around just what's like one notable question that we've been asked. Okay, each person, we can just go through one and then see how, yeah. Aditi, what's that one question that you think is important?
So one question that they've asked is, the one that actually stumped me recently was, how would your colleagues describe you? because it really makes you introspect and talk about your design approach and your collaborative approach. That one really threw me for a doozy, because you think you know, but it's really hard to communicate it without sounding like you're boasting about yourself or like you're being overly critical. But yeah, I think this is a good one that you can prepare ahead of time, or even slip in when you're describing yourself, so it helps support your working approach.
Nice. I think the one that stumped me was, give me an example of a time you dealt with conflict at work. Then I was just like, oh, there's so many, or like there's so little at the same time, right? I think sometimes it also shows what you might be experiencing in your role, because like there's a reason behind the questions that they're asking, right? Maybe that the place that you're interviewing at might be conflict driven, or they might have different clashing cultures and things like that, and they want to know as a candidate whether you have the ability to kind of tackle something like that. So yeah, that was a question that was pretty hard, and like a question that actually can be prepared for, right? So like just go through some of your past experiences on potentially like challenging situations and really reflect on them. So that's where also like that self-development and self-mastery takes place, and it's a good thing to have in general, not just for interviewing. Okay, and then so what is one question that we feel is important when we are interviewing?
So when we ask them, I think it's I have a few, but the one that would be is, why did the last designer quit?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really big one, especially like for us in our field, we move roles fairly frequently. I would say 2 years, 2.5 years is average in a role, because there's a saturation point depending on what you do, unless you're more senior and then you're growing into a manager role. But also just understanding why. Often hiring is to replace a headcount, more often than not. So why did they actually leave? If they can give you a transparent answer, you know why. If not, do your digging, try and find out who that person was and have a word with them before you try to jump into a company.
Yeah, I think for myself is I always like to ask, especially a design manager, like what's your priority for the team? So I think they're just like for the year, like even just have that context, just so you know where you're getting into. And then I'm just gonna also just put down this reverse interview sample question, like this thing I got online. And what I did is like I'll have a few questions and I'll ask the same set of companies the same questions, so that I can have like a fair comparison. And one that's like a bit more controversial is like, what's the biggest risk or unknown that you would be taking and having me on? So that's something that I know sometimes it's like a bit hard to ask, but then it's helpful because then you know where their insecurities might lie in you by if they choose you. Okay, and then this is also like another cheat sheet of sorts that we prepared. Is there anything you want to call out, Aditi?
I think just, don't make the mistake that I do, which is try to write your case studies right when you need to set up your portfolio for interviews. Do them as you're doing your job. Make sure you capture feedback from your interviews. Just have a piece of paper or a pen. Just make sure that you're capturing feedback, so you're iterating your portfolio as you go. And make sure you know what you want from your job. Ask those questions, rule out the red flags, because just as much as you want the job, they need to want you and do right by you.
Nice. Yeah, I think this is a good way to end off the session. Maybe last thoughts. What's like your one final advice that you want to give to the session?
Have your templates in place as much as it is like just like a user journey. Plot what your life is going to look like while going through this experience, and just have your frameworks and your templates in place. It makes life a lot easier. A friend who is a design manager gave me this advice. She was like, just have these basics, and the more you practice and the more you keep interviewing, it'll get easier. I'm just going to add one more. Don't stop interviewing, because it's a hard process to come back to. Otherwise, you lose your rhythm. Things come a lot more intuitively. You don't have to be actively looking to switch, but at least understand the market and then figure out what is there to offer and what your market value is.
Yeah, I think I'll just build upon that as well. interviewing was a very emotional process for me as well. I think Aditi talked about anxiety, but for me it was that like fear of rejection. So the more you do it, the better, or like you get more used to it as well. And I think, yeah, just like know that interviewing is about assessing you as a candidate, not you as a person. So it's like when you get rejection, don't take it upon personally. And yeah, I think it's helpful just to know like what's your market's worth, but at the same time be able to always know that storytelling, craft that storytelling skill. Yeah, I think one last thing I wanted to say is like, I think it's not just about UX, but interviewing in general. There's this thing called centering yourself. So that really helps you put yourself in like a neutral state before an interview. You can do it before, like during a virtual interview or in person as well. Just kind of like sit on a chair, make sure your feet touch the ground, and then close your eyes, take 3 deep breaths. So that's something that personally helps me when makes me feel calm and prepared for the interview that's gonna happen. Yeah, that's the last things that I wanted to share. We only have 3 minutes left, so I don't know if we're gonna be able to do any Q&A. But yeah, if you have anything, I don't know if Slido is gonna be, it's a bit like overkill for the people we have today. So if you have any questions, just feel free to put them on the chat. But we will also monitor the Slido as well. So these are some questions that are here. These are questions that we thought might be helpful. So if there's anything else that folks want to bring up or ask, there's the perfect time. You have maybe 1 minute to do so. Okay. If not, are there any questions that you want to cover here?
I see some questions coming in, or it's just, oh, are you scrolling through?
Yeah. Okay. I think that 1 minute is up. So
Oh. Should we just answer the ones that you have?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to answer the one that's around the non-disclosure? I think we talked about it earlier just now.
Sure. Was it what if my work is protected?
Yeah, this one.
That's a common one, and that's something I have been unfortunately facing for the better part of my career. So if my work is protected under non-disclosure, this is a conscious decision. I'm not trying to sway anyone, but you should try to figure this out upfront when you're joining a company, because the next company that you try to work at will always try to evaluate you based on the impact, the kind of work that you did, or the growth that you had, right? So even though the session's being recorded, try and see if you can smuggle your work off and change the branding, change the colors, find a way to talk about it. Do not put it on your portfolio if your portfolio is public. Have it hidden, and whenever you're applying to jobs, caveat that these are 2 projects that you will be free to talk through when you're sharing your screen, but make sure all the branding is gone and keep it minimal. But if you don't have access to the work at all, recreate it. That's all I can say. It's something that I will have to do for some of my work, which is a really hard one, which is where the advice or the suggestion that we shared earlier about writing your case studies as you are doing your projects really comes in handy. So try doing that, and you can build bits and pieces so you have something to show. Otherwise, it's stay clear of the jobs that don't let you keep some amount of your work. Yes, you have privacy issues, but sometimes it's even hard to just get it off a server, and then you can be sued for it. So yeah, just be careful, but know that when you're joining a company, or at least have an agreement with your creative director, which is what I've had before, in writing that I will be able to publish my work after a certain point, depending on when it's launched or something. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. Good pro tips. Yeah, I think we are aware that it's like 1 minute past the timing, but I actually saw questions that just came in that I think will be helpful to answer. So I wonder if like maybe Shreya or Brinda, you want to officially close off the session, and then whoever else who wants to stay on, we can still spend some time in answering some of these questions. So that'd be good.
Thank you, Aditi and Esther, for such a wonderful session. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you have just 1 or 2 minutes, I've shared the feedback form. I request you all to please fill it up so that Women Who Code can improve the workshops and the sessions. And also, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and you can get to know about the upcoming sessions and events. And also, I request everyone to please switch on their video for a minute so that I can click a group picture.
Thanks, Candice.
Okay, it's fine.
We'll just capture their amazing headshots anyway.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Nice. Okay. And yeah, before we get to the questions, I guess just feel free to connect with Aditi and I. So we can be found on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I also hold some kind of like one-on-one sessions on ADP list if you want to have like more personal chats. So yeah, or like just feel free to message us on LinkedIn as well. I think we'll be both glad to just chat with everyone. Yeah, so thanks for joining today's session. If you want to kind of drop off, feel free to do so. But I think Aditi and I, let's go down to like these few questions that folks have been mentioning. So I think
I don't mind sticking around and helping
yeah,
out.
if you don't mind, I think just wait for a few more minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Yeah, so I think I saw this one first. So what was your portfolio like in your first UI UX role? Do you remember?
My portfolio for my first UI UX role. Okay, so I learned to be a UI UX role designer on the job. I had my graphic design portfolio. So what helped put me over the edge was actually a friend was already working there, put me through as a junior suggested person, and I had to prove in conversation that I could think for the kind of work that they were doing, which is why I end up leaning towards the whole personality and how you solve problems bit. So I didn't have I had a couple of digital graphics, no platform, no breakdown of anything. I learned everything on the job.
Yeah, for me as well. I think now there's so many resources out there that talks about like the whole process you have to go through, case studies and all. But I remember my first UI UX was just like a dump of all the graphics that I've done over the years, like be it a poster that I did for school, or was it like some fake website that I was trying to do to order breakfast online, like a breakfast subscription service. So there was like literally no users research done, and so it was just like a good idea that we thought was pretty cool. And then what we did was then like there is that intention behind it, right? There's a reason why. So I mean, I don't know at that point in time whether I was able to have that like rigor and being able to explain it, but it's always important to kind of share like, okay, this is the intention behind it. I think a lot of candidates, like we're always looking for design intention, right? Are you able to reason why this thing that you created should exist in the first place and talk through it and kind of like the way that you designed it? I think that was what I experienced, like even though it was just a whole bunch of maybe conceptual projects or potentially like just graphic stuff. There are some questions that I get asked, right? Like, why do I choose to do it this way? Why is it like a layout kind of question or whatnot? Yeah, and I think previously, like early on in the career, there's always more about trying to cram everything in. So I remember I had like 8 projects. I just like have like 50 slides or something, just like talking about all the different projects that I did. And then so now it's like you have to be very selective into really showcasing the work that you're proud of and showcasing the work that you want to do next time. Yeah, so I think this is our question for our first UI UX role. I think this other one that I saw was this one. You mentioned keep interviewing. How do we do so if we're already with an organization? Wouldn't that be a conflict of interest?
I don't think it's a conflict of interest. You're having a conversation with someone. So what you do need to be careful about is whether that someone you're interviewing with is friends with your current boss, which has happened and is not great. So do your LinkedIn stalking, figure out who is connected to who, and make sure that you also call out and tell them that, hey, I am keeping my options open, even though I'm currently happy. Sometimes being transparent that you're actually trying to figure out what else is out there. Sometimes it works, just be really careful, dig up a little bit of information on the person, but there's no harm in interviewing. You never know. This economy is volatile. Look at this post-pandemic world. You can get laid off any day, even if you're a great designer. You can get hired because there's a very specific need. It is so volatile. Also, there's a surplus of us in the world and there's not enough jobs for it. So keeping your options open isn't doing wrong. Like if you leak confidential documents, that's a conflict of interest and that is illegal. But if you're just speaking to someone, it's just good practice. Also realize this, that so many companies will put up job postings but aren't actually looking for a candidate. They're just banking on resumes and then trying to build an archive of designers that they can reach out to if they need someone, and they can just reach out immediately. So it's like a tit for tat situation. It's not great that they do that to us, but it doesn't hurt to do that as well. Just it keeps your practice up of being able to deal with interviews with less anxiety, or at least I think so.
Yeah, I think officially there's really no rule that company says that, okay, you can't interview out. So that's something that hopefully can put your mind at ease. I know of colleagues who have been interviewing out. So that's also something that from example. Right? I mean, I don't know at present, but they've mentioned that even in a role that maybe they've just gone in for a couple of months, you can continue interviewing just to know and then also one thing my colleague mentioned to me is a good way to network. So even if you're not looking out for that job, you want to know the person, you can connect with them after they interview you, connect with them on LinkedIn, just have conversation. At this next time if you've made an impression, if they're looking out for someone next time, then you might be someone who they come they think about. And it could be also, the US community in Singapore at least is pretty small. So even for myself, there will always be people asking, Esther, do you know anybody who is looking out for a role? So yeah, just always keep that thing open. And yeah, it's a way to just build up your skills and continue to stay connected with everyone else in the industry.
Last point to add to that even if you interview with someone, I've been lucky in Singapore that the person who was interviewing didn't end up hiring me, but ended up putting me forward for another job at a different point with another friend of theirs who was hiring. So build those connections. Those relationships really matter.
Yeah. What do you think about the last few questions here? Someone upvoted them, so maybe someone's interested. So, but I don't know.
As a career switcher, should I be interviewing for a junior or a senior position? Career switcher from what? You can turn on your camera and just speak.
Well,
let's have a conversation. I just feel like it's Esther and I throwing questions and answers at each other. So just ask, give us a little bit of context.
Not sure if they're still here, I guess.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I was the one who upvoted the question. So yeah, I was just curious. So let's say I'm currently a developer. If I want to move towards something that's more UI UX oriented, what kind of things should I do?
If you wait, so is that related to you? And you should interview for a junior position, because unless you've had specific experience actually doing design work, you should definitely apply for a junior or mid. You might be able to defend that, hey, this is the breadth of my work, but you should also show UI thinking. So if you look at other portfolios, not necessarily copy what they're doing, but look at the things that they call out to showcase their design. So whatever you're developing, start writing and crafting and talking about it from that lens. I think that would definitely help you.
I do think also it depends on how long you've been working and like what kind of engineer are you. If you're really working on front-end design and you've been working or collaborating very closely with designers, there are designers who involve like a lot of developers in their interviewing process or research synthesis process as well. So if those things that you have under the experience, definitely call it out. And I feel, I mean, there could be a case for senior, definitely, depending on how long you've been in the dentistry, or if not, what Aditi was saying, like a mid-level that kind of can very quickly advance to a senior could be something to consider as well. Yeah, so like when I was, I previously was doing a teaching assistant role in General Assembly. So that's like a place where people go to go for UX boot camps. And a lot of these people, when they go in, they are newbies, right? They learn about UX, but then when they transit out, they go straight into like a leadership role, just because UX is something that adds to what they're already doing. If they're art director or someone who's already doing graphic design, or even if they're studying psychology and something like that. So these are really great things that UX is not just one special craft, right? There's so many different qualifications. Like when you talk about like engineering, software engineering, that could be also something that you learn that really relates to making like better design or making your skill a bit more well-rounded and more experienced. Yeah, so I don't know, do you have any other questions from that, or is that helpful?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
This one's a scary one. How do you answer the tell me about yourself question? Well, where do I start? Back in 1989. I think this one is, when they ask you this question, I think they're asking you more about your ambition. What brings you to how you ended up being a designer, or whatever the role is today? And what are you trying to do forward with it, and how does that fit in with their company? So I guess the way I just responded to it is how I would structure talking about it as well. Esther,
Yeah.
how would you go about answering?
This is the question that is already usually prepared in the portfolio. So if they ask me this, I'm like, okay, let's start my portfolio presentation, and I'll kind of go through a deck, and I'll be prepared to kind of like showcase examples, like even just things that are not even about UX, but maybe parallel work, like I do some embroidery or craft work. So I'll be like, oh, these are things that I really are interested to in my free time. So that's like helping them understand you as a person, maybe assess you as a potential teammate as well, right? So we talked about culture as well. And then there's some other things around like volunteering and kind of helping the person understand you as a person. But then at the same time, just also seeing how that could relate to what the company cares about, like things that maybe are a bit more mission or values oriented, or something that you've kind of seen, you know, when we talked about looking at the person who's interviewing you and seeing where they come from, like do a little bit of like Googling of the person, stalking a little bit, see what are some of their interests. Maybe potentially you can find some sort of connection that can make a difference in the way they evaluate you or see you as a person. And then tell me about yourself. I wanted to say in Shopify, there's actually this unique thing that every interview would start with a life cycle interview or some sort of like life story interview, right? So it's 1 hour free form interview with a recruiter. They don't even really ask any questions. It's just 1 hour. You can talk about anything you want, just like what motivates you as a person, how you have led to the way you are today. And then you can start anywhere. You can start from the day you were born. You can start from maybe you graduated from school. And then just like that helps them to understand who you are. So that's something that's unique, and I guess encompasses the whole tell me about yourself. Yeah, so like starting from when you got interested in design in the first place, so from the first day you play with Lego or something like that. So like being able to find this like memorable, notable moments, I think also helps in kind of, helping to make people know who you are. Yeah.
If you're capturing points for this, then maybe one way to look at it is, how do I answer this for a job role? Like, the business perspective, tell me about yourself, and then who am I as a person, because you are a human being joining that team, right? Not all of us are fortunate to have the time and span to do a life story session with our respective recruiters. Sometimes you're lucky that the manager that you speak to or the person liaising with you will actually have like a half an hour session or like a meeting, do one round of getting to know you and just skimming through your work or your vibe or your, you know, value system or whatever it is. But if asked this question, maybe structuring it at work, I am this person, this is who I am as a designer, and then this is who I am in life beyond and outside these doors.
Nice. Well, okay. Shall we do the last question? It's getting too late, but I'm really honored that everyone is still on the call.
Yes, you already answered this though.
Right, yeah, this is kind of what we mentioned earlier, by our first interviewing experience, right? Our first portfolio experience. Yeah, I think in today's context though, what could happen or what I've seen that were also impressive were people who do personal projects. And like there are some people who do redesign projects, but that one I'm feeling a bit critical about, because a lot of the times if you just take a website and do a redesign, you don't know what constraints the company is working with. But it's also worthwhile just calling that out and then just saying that, you know, this is a creative exercise for you personally, but know what you are trying to showcase in each portfolio piece. So if you're just trying to showcase your visual design skills, a redesign could be helpful, but if you're trying to show maybe like how you tackle a business problem and stuff like that, that might be less, because then you don't know everything around the product itself. Yeah, so I think that's one. And then another one is just look for organizations that have projects. So in Singapore, there are pretty, I guess, wide range of areas and nonprofits who are looking for UX work. So that's something to kind of venture into. And that's helpful because if you're really working with like a client, even if it's not a paying client, right, you can support with really like real life examples of like what's happening right now, talk to people and understand how their current kind of needs are and pain points are. So yeah, I think those two, just like finding pet projects as well as being able to do some volunteer projects if you can.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, cool. Yeah, I think so. We've kind of come to the end of today's session. So thank you so much officially for joining. And I'm just gonna leave this slide up. Yeah, feel free to connect with us. We're always happy to talk to more people, especially those who are interested in UX. Yeah. Thank you. Aditi, anything else?
Thank you.